Hi, welcome to Nellie on the Sofa, our monthly webinar training sessions that we're completing at the moment. I think this is our sixth maybe that we've done now. My name's Ben Slater. To introduce myself to those that haven't joined us before, I'm the director at Nellie Sports, and today I'm really lucky, and I'm saying that because she's my wife. We're joined on the sofa with Kerry. Kerry's also one of our directors at Nellie Sports, and is our lead on our life expectancy work, our life expectancy reports. So we're going to be talking about that today. I'm also hoping that there's a BBC caster out there that's watching us and thinking that we could be the next Richard and Judy. Hi. Would be great, honest. No, please don't. So Kerry, please tell everyone who you are and what your qualifications are.
Hi, I'm Kerry. So I have several degrees in the realm of forensic science, a bachelor's degree and a master's in forensic anthropology. Before we started Nellie Sports, I was a scientist and a researcher for the University of Lincoln. What I bring to the company now is my statistical analysis and my research skills, and I produce life expectancy reports for the courts.
Cool. There's a little bit more to you than that, though, isn't there? Because you're also a fellow of the Royal Institute of Forensic Anthropology, which just sounds cool. And I know some of you have heard this brag from me before, but that means that Kerry can go to the British Library and withdraw a book from the British Library, which no, you're not supposed to be allowed to do, and she can take it home. So we're hoping one day to go down and maybe take away an artefact, just some gold or something. The other cool story that I've got about Kerry, and she didn't know I was going to mention this, was during the pandemic, Kerry wrote our risk minimisation policy for COVID, a huge booklet on exactly what to do from the moment we walked into somebody's house to leaving their house and going home. And I was listening to LBC Radio one afternoon, and a senior scientist for the government was talking about risk minimisation, and he mentioned that he'd just read a fantastic COVID policy by this lady, and then didn't drop her name, but explained Kerry's policy in full detail over the radio and didn't give her credit, which I was gutted for. But just what he was saying. So you've got a lot of experience in not just life expectancy, but that data analysis, looking at different things, analysing the data, and then creating reports from it.
Yeah. So I'm got experience with the forensic side of business, so analysis, research, creating procedures. I help create procedures for the Metropolitan Police in disaster victimisation. That is where I like to tick all the boxes, and thanks to my procedure, we kept our staff and their families safe during COVID.
Yeah, we didn't have any incidents.
No.
There was concerns from some parties that we would be super spreaders. But we
not my staff. I made sure they followed a traffic light system to make sure they stayed safe, their families stay safe, and our clients stay safe.
My car, it ended up losing colouring on the leather because the amount of bleach wipes that we used on it.
Everything was wiped down. We were lucky. We had a separate the garden door had a separate shower room, so he literally came in, stripped, had a shower, and it was all bunged in the washing machine before he even entered the house where me and the kids were. And most of our staff, followed my procedures, and like I said, we were very lucky.
Yeah, we were. So life expectancy, I know I've spoken to a couple of solicitors and they've kind of gone, oh yeah, life expectancy, that's easy, we run it through this computer system. We use the government website and things like that, and man's life expectancy is 76 years old, woman's is 75, or and they just use that. But that's just a computer generated model, isn't it? There's more to life expectancy. Do you want to explain what life expectancy is?
Yeah, so life expectancy is an estimate on someone's likelihood to live going forward, their lifetime. Yes, you can do national statistics that will pump out a specific age based on gender and the year they were born. But it doesn't take into account that person. It doesn't take into account any health conditions, any social care needs, any genetic issues. You know, it doesn't look at the person. So that's where I come in. So I look at them from two sides. I look at it from the health. So I will take into account any diagnosis, any genetic conditions, and then from the social side, I will look at their needs. So the best ones I do is when our lovely assessors have done a needs assessment, and that identifies their current needs. And then I research, and I'm probably going off on a tangent.
No. I find it really interesting because we've always joked, haven't we, as a couple, that you're the scientist and social work is a little bit more not a science.
Yeah.
But we've both got bachelors in science qualification, masters in your case. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to push on that too much. But actually, the life expectancy is it is science. It is data. It's data driven, but it has to be person centered.
Yeah.
It has to be holistic.
Yeah.
It has to be all those things that social work is, but be data driven behind it. So I think it's really interesting for me that we see the social workers going out and doing their care needs assessment, which are fully person centered. It's about that person. It's about understanding who they are, their unique situation, how those needs are then being met.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be very unique, because it could be in a nursing home, it could be in a neuro rehabilitation unit, or it could just be at home with family.
Yeah.
But depending on that level of care, depending on the medication they're taking, on lots of different factors, right down to, I assume, where they live as well, and things like that. Geography, I suppose, comes into it, and nutrition and things. So we collect all that data as social workers, and then you're able to then sift through that data and academize it. I don't know what the word is, but make it more academic, make it more.
Yes.
It's still about them. It's still person centered, but it's data driven.
Yes, that's very much so. Yeah, you touched on a good part. I come from a more analytical background. So
that's better than academization, I think. Analytic.
Yeah, analytic. So I take an analytic approach. So yes, first of all, I will read through all medical documents and the needs assessment, which I always find is the best insight into someone, because our assessor's been there face to face with that person, and it is what's happening now. What needs do they have now? What care is in place right now? That is the most important part. And then I collect all the, as my assessors also, the boring scientific and medical data I sift through and read through to find, the medical conditions and life expectancy on those, but then I cross-reference them on the life expectancy for certain care needs like peg feeding, and I kind of cross-reference it all and do a lot of statistics and boring things, as the rest of my team feel, although I love it. And then, I churn out a number at the end. It's not a direct number. I do give a range because that's the best way scientifically to do.
I think that must be terrifying, though, mustn't it, to sit there and sort of, if you were not going to give a range, I'm sorry, Lucy, you'll die on your 75th birthday, the third day, the 13th hour, and that's not how it works.
So no, it's not how it works. It is always based on probability, and I always provide a range, the shortest range I can, but because there's so many variables to take into account. And it's not fair to give someone a date like, they're going to die by 73. No, it's not fair because there's so many factors to take into account. Lifestyle, their conditions, if their conditions get worse, what kind of care they're receiving. I mean, in some circumstances...
That's a really important one, isn't it? Because you've mentioned this to me before about care, where we've seen reports and they haven't discussed care. They've based it solely on the medical side of it. And again, this is something we argued in mental capacity and in care assessments. It's called the pathologization of an assessment, which is where you focus solely on that person's illness and you kind of forget that they're a human being. So it's just you're treating the cancer, you're treating the dementia, rather than you're treating Polly or David or Samantha or whoever. With those reports, they're ignoring the fact that some people are receiving fantastic care that prolongs their life,
absolutely.
and some people aren't receiving that good care, and that's diminishing.
Yeah, it could be as simple as someone helping manage their medication.
Yeah.
If someone's not there helping, and then they forget the medication, and obviously they deteriorate more. In some instances, because the care has been so good, and I had one case where it was actually a family member taking care of their loved one, they'd exceeded any statistics that I pulled out of the literature, the medical literature, they'd exceeded it all because of the constant good one-to-one care that they had received.
And when you're talking about medical literature, you're not talking about BBC News articles here, are you?
No.
You're talking about
medical journals,
peer-reviewed research articles, aren't you? Yeah.
I only do the peer-reviewed ones, and most recent ones as well. UK population-based as well. They're all medical journals by renowned doctors.
And that age range that you're talking about, that conclusion to the assessment, to the report, that's not your opinion.
No.
This is what the facts tell me.
Yes.
Every conclusion that you come to within a life expectancy report that conclusion is based on the facts.
It's all evidence based.
And I believe that.
So I do a court compliant CPR 35.
25. CPR 35. No, family.
Yes.
FPR 25.
report, and my report basically outlines. So I evidence every single conclusion that I come, and I reference everything. I will be the first one to say I am not a medical doctor. I do not diagnose. I get all my evidence from the real medical experts, their literature, their data. I just bring it all together and do it in terms that the judge will understand, and evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I know, there's always this thing about, and it was the same with mental capacity, wasn't it? You have to be a doctor, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a doctor. The ridiculous thing is that in insurance companies, it's not doctors at all. They're unqualified people that are making these life expectancy decisions, based purely on a computer algorithm that takes nothing into account apart from what's already been programmed into that computer algorithm. So again, if you ring up your insurance company for a life insurance quote, it's based on almost the national statistic. Do you smoke? Do you drink? Things like that. The computer says this. I'd be quite happy to buy one of those systems, and we could pump out NAF life expectancies.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be
one
us.
after another, after another. But that's not person-centred.
It's not person. I mean, when we started the company, we always wanted to be there for the person. It's holistic, it's personal-centred and everything. And that's how my life expectancy reports. I mean, it's not a lovely subject, talking about, when you're possibly going to die. So I need to make sure that it's bespoke to that person because it's important. My reports are for the judge, and yes, it's more for a financial exercise for the judge to help him make decisions when it comes to statutory wills, financial gifts.
Divorce cases as well, we've done a few for,
settlement for divorces and property sales and things like that. The majority of mine are statutory wills, but we can do it for tax purposes and everything.
Yeah, I mean the divorce cases are generally where the estate is quite large. One of the partners has got something like dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, Parkinson's dementia, something like that, and they know there's going to be care needs in the future. We just need to identify how long is that future going to be for.
Yeah, so they can set aside the funds to make sure that the care is being paid for.
Yeah. So we mentioned about the life insurance guys, the insurance companies using computer systems to identify life expectancy. Now I know that they're going to be using what's called logic-based systems. So how many? Do you smoke? Yes, that's 1 point. Do you smoke 20 a day, 30 a day, and they'll get different points. The computer system at the end of it will add it all up, give you a scoring system, and it will say that's your life expectancy. We don't do that, and I know you don't do that.
No.
But can you envisage a point where AI is able to do what you're doing? Do you think AI could take over? I'm basically saying, can we sack you? Can you program an AI system to do what you do?
No.
Really?
I mean, for example, the clients that we have, I mean, the last one I did, I had to research about 20 different diagnoses and care needs. I individually researched all those, and then obviously I pulled together the most prominent ones that were going to affect life expectancy the worst. I don't know that much about AI, but I don't think it could do all of that. And then prove where they found all that research and find credible research.
I think
articles.
that's going to be the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because AI is really good at data analysis. It can spew out and very, very quickly
give you an answer, but where did that answer come from?
But yeah, if that answer's come from Wikipedia, then there's no value there. Or if it's come from a piece of research, I suppose, where you're reading it and you go, actually, this isn't true, or it's debunked, or
a lot of the so for example, if I'm looking at peg feeding, I won't just rely on one source. I would normally get 3 sources, and I will evidence all 3 of them, and then I would do like a little average between them all. So I don't base it all on just what one doctor said.
It's a critical argument.
It's a critical argument, yeah. Like I said, I'll research all of them, and if they don't affect life expectancy, I'll then explain that in my report. I don't dismiss anything, but then will highlight and focus on the ones that do affect life expectancy. And I always get 2 or 3 different experts and their evidence, and then pull it all together.
Going back to the very beginning almost then, we said about your reports being CPR 35 compliant. So those that don't know, that's Civil Procedure Rules 35, which is basically a set of rules by the Civil Procedure that says this is how an expert's report must be laid out, and it has to have certain things. But using my now famous word, your reports are quite academically clicky, aren't they?
Academically.
Academically. But they're structured in that academic style, aren't they? Of almost like writing an essay at university or something like that. It's that critical argument approach throughout. It's not just, I think that this lady will live to 78 years old because this one person
My
said
opinion
so.
doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
I am an expert, but I'm an expert in research. So I pull together the evidence from the doctors and the medical practitioners because that's who's created all this data. I mean, I would love to at some point get a grant and do my own research data, but for now I'm researching.
Yes, PhD's on the way. So why should a life expectancy be done?
For my purposes and for our purposes, I do them for the court protection judge. So it comes
So you're
under,
writing to him.
Yeah, I'm
right.
Well, it's to provide additional evidence for the judge to make a decision. It comes under Practice Directive 9E for statutory wills, mainly, that I do, which basically on the guidance, an up-to-date life expectancy is required for the judge to make an informed decision about the financial future for that person. So it could be, for example, the statutory will. He needs to make sure that a certain amount of money is set aside to make sure that that person's care and needs are met for the duration of their life.
No, with that practice direction 9E, because I remembered it. Sometimes we get people sort of saying, "Well, I don't need a report. I just need the outcome of the expectancy. I just need one sentence saying Mrs. Smith will live between 90 and 95 years old." But that's a little bit like somebody coming to us and saying, I just want the outcome of a capacity assessment. I don't want the assessment. I don't want the report. I just want you to say yes or no. You can't say yes or no. You can't say this will be the life expectancy without doing all the background work. And it always surprises me. We get members of the public, but solicitors as well, that are just like, well, no, I'll pay you a tenner to just tell me how long she's going to live for. But it's just not possible to do that, is it?
But it's not fair, and it's not practical.
It's not possible unless you use a dodgy little computer system.
No, I don't think it's best practice, and it's a disservice to that person just to pluck a finger out the air. I think that person deserves a bit of time.
I think the other side of it is as well.
And the judge deserves.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I was a judge, I would be sat there going, well, okay, this forensic anthropologist, forensic scientist, this social worker, whoever it is, has said, little Doris is going to live until she's 78 years old. Based on what? From where are you getting this information?
I don't think a judge would accept that. I mean, I may be wrong there.
I would hope that they'd be more critical than saying, well, we've got it off of the Department for Statistics, because there is so much more involved. So we look at testamentary. What other reasons why would you get life expectancy?
I think it'd be a more substantial financial gifts being made.
So lifetime gifts.
Lifetime gifts. Yeah. I've had one where it's been an annual gift based on income.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I've had for property sales, so where the assets of the property are going, and divorce settlements.
So the annual gift, they would have had to have had capacity to start with to understand how much they're giving, the impact on their own finances. But then I suppose from your point of view, if they've got, I'm going to make my math really simple here, if they've got £100,000 in the bank and they're giving away £10,000 a year, if their life expectancy is 2 years, well, that's only £20,000 out of £100,000. But if they're going to live for the next 40 years, they're going to run out of money and not be able to pay for their care. I can see where life expectancy comes in then, because it changes everything, doesn't it? Yeah. So lifetime gifts, testamentary capacity. We mentioned divorce. Are there any other cases where?
Any types of financial settlements. I think we've had some with business owners.
Okay.
Any type of large financial dealings or transactions, and the person is, potentially not going to be around for, 80, 90 years. I think the judge, if it's going to the judge, then he needs to have all the information to make an informed decision.
But for a statutory will, there's a legal requirement for a life expectancy.
Yes, because otherwise, how can the judge make an informed decision? Without knowing how much longer that person's got. Yeah,
they could be 18 and be living for the next 60 years.
And I have done some for, I wouldn't say children, young adults, 20, 23. They are heartbreaking to do, I must admit. But the judge needs that information, so I provide it.
I think we've done capacity assessments with younger adults and children, and they're always the ones that I think hit our social workers the hardest. And sometimes they're amazing and they're brilliant.
Sometimes they surpass all expectations. So even I think one of them, I said, look, this was the life expectancy. They've surpassed that.
And you can only do that on the scale of probability.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
It's like we get asked on capacity, is there a possibility this person could regain capacity in the future? Well, if the person has got Alzheimer's dementia, then we always say something like, well, actually, it's highly unlikely that they'd regain capacity because of the degenerative nature of the illness. But we can't say for sure, because there might be a cure tomorrow. I mean, there are plenty of people with severe disabilities that 10 years ago, their life expectancy would have been 30 years less than it is today. Purely because, off the top of my head, HIV and AIDS, back in the 80s, it was a death sentence. It was as simple as that. Now, it's almost cured. You know, as long as it's caught early and you take your medication on a regular basis and things like that, your life expectancy is increased phenomenally. So the idea of being able to sort of say this is definitive just isn't possible, is it?
No, and again, there's so many factors to take into account. It is that, but it's also, you know, their lifestyle, and what the conditions are, if they're receiving treatment, at what stage of any illness they're at. I mean, the list goes on the variables that you need to take into account, or that you can't take into account. That's why I find it's best practice to give a range.
So we touched on it a little bit earlier about social care and things like that, but can you explain a little bit more about why it's so important to not use that bog standard computer model, why it's so important to take into other factors like social care?
Well, it goes back to that the P that I did a few weeks ago. That they had phenomenal care. I mean, it was family based, so it wasn't all private, and he's surpassed. His prostate cancer had gone, and he just was enjoying life and surpassing quite a few of the milestones. And I think that was greatly to do with the care that he was receiving.
That must have been quite strange to have the frustration almost of not being able to get the conclusion that you needed academically. I'll use that word again. Because, you know, you're saying, well, all of the research, all of the data is saying, all of that, you know, if you've gone through the insurance models, everything was saying he won't live to 75, and there he is at 80 years old. And it must be it's frustrating, but also brilliant as well.
I think it shows lifestyle and care, how much that impacts on life expectancy, because perhaps if he'd been in a different facility, a care home or something, without that loving nurture of their partner, perhaps he wouldn't have lasted that long. But he did. I'm not saying that's true, but I've just, from comparing case studies that I've worked on, there's some where they've had, you can tell that the care has been just phenomenal. And then they suddenly, it does make a huge difference.
You've pulled up a really good point there about care in care homes, because I know there's a statistic out there somewhere that says that the average life expectancy for somebody in a care home is a year. Now, when people mention that, they automatically go, that's because the care in a care home compared to the care at home is so poor, so bad, that you will only live for a year in a care home.
Well, I don't agree with that.
That's not true.
No.
It's actually your illness, your dementia, your illness has become so progressed that you're having to go into a care home. And it's, you know, if that person had stayed at home, they may have only lived for another 3 months. Going into their care home actually extended their life. It's just that when you go to a care home, it's because things are really bad.
Things have got to the point.
That's why life expectancy in care homes is so short. But it's that interpretation of that data, isn't it?
It's difficult. It goes back to that person. I mean, that person, you know, we've met them where they just don't want to give up. And they just persevere, and they just keep going and keep going.
Oh, the amount of people that I've heard that have said things like, I'm going to get to 95 years old, I want to be 95, or I want to get to 100. 100 seems to be the big one. And they push and push and push and push, and they manage to get to 100, and 2 weeks later they die. And it's almost like they've set, I am not giving up. I've seen people in horrific physical condition, and they're 102 years old, and they still just keep going. It's a very strange thing, but that identification of the data, and then not almost like a scientific bias, almost, I suppose. You know, some people could look at the data on care home longevity and pull it in, and well, I want to be disrespectful to. Be negative about care homes and pull it over. I know there's a couple of case studies that you wanted to talk about. There was a young man, wasn't there, in the 20s?
Yes.
with cerebral palsy.
Spastic cerebral palsy, so that affects the motor system.
Okay.
So yeah, it was an interesting one. It was one of my young ones. He was 23, and he was still living at home with mum and dad, and they were taking excellent care. Very happy person, and it was for a statutory will. So the judge, we'd already assessed, and he didn't have capacity to make a will, so it was going to go to the court protection. Therefore, I was asked to do life expectancy on the gentleman, and thankfully our assessor had already done a needs assessment. So yeah, it was an interesting one, and like I said, I don't always like doing the young ones, but he was a good one.
And you don't actually meet these people, do you?
No.
It's
No.
all based on...
From my point of view, I'm kind of glad I don't. But I kind of get quite a good insight on who they are by just reading their medical history and their needs assessment. And I get quite a lot from the assessors' capacity assessments as well. Because one of the things that I do look into is their mental capacity and if they've got capacity for certain decisions, because that can indicate what stage of an illness they're also at. So I divulge from all types of different aspects, and based on their fabulous assessors' assessments, I don't feel I need to see them.
Oh, so for him, for example, because he lacked capacity to manage his own or testamentary capacity, you were then able to identify what stage of cognitive impairment that he had, and then
because he also had a financial deputy, so that told me he lacked capacity for finances. He lacked capacity to testamentary assessment, which is an easier test than MCA. So I knew from that, so that helped me identify, at what point,
because there is categorisation.
Absolutely, and especially when it comes to Alzheimer's
you can
and
go
vascular dementia.
Level 1, level 3, level 4, level 5.
Again, brilliant websites that state which stage you are based on the type of care that you need, whether mobility, whether you're peg fed, and capacity.
And then of course you get our Montreal cognitive assessments for our moral assessors as well, which gives you an insight into cognitive function as well. So with your young man, with your 20-year-old, what sort of things were you... I mean, he had spastic cerebral palsy. Was there other illnesses that were impacting on him more?
No, it was just mainly his physical needs, and then it was affecting his mind as well.
Okay, so we're looking at cognition and spastic cerebral palsy as the main factors. So you then went off, you did your research, identified several different life expectancies, and then amalgamated it to come out with one overall. I've got, and what was the overall picture for him?
Oh, now you put me on the spot. I can't remember.
Was it good, or was it a bit?
It wouldn't have been. I would probably say it was probably 20% less than what he would normally have had.
So he was still getting into his 60s. Yeah. But there must be something slightly positive, I suppose, because like you said, if somebody goes through one of those computer systems and I've got this illness, bang, straight away, 20 to 30 years old, because it's not taking into account the care and things like that.
I mean, that one
wasn't... So for his mum and dad,
it sounds simpler than it is, but...
and go, this is actually lovely, we know our son's not well.
Well, I mean, my report, it may be analytical, but it talks about the person. So I'll pull in evidence from these assessments and medical records, and I'll talk about that person as a person.
One more thing is that it's almost going back to that, the idea at Nellie Sports of having that therapeutic assessment, that it's not just about saying this is the facts for the judge, but the mother and father in that case might have sat back and gone, oh my God, our son's going to have a full life. He's going to live well into his 60s. Actually, that's another 40 years away. There could be medical interventions between now and then that mean that he lives to 70 or 80. For me as a parent, my biggest fear, I think, would be that he was only going to live for another 5 years or 8 years, and my son wasn't going to have a full, long life. So from a therapeutic point, the parents in that case are getting something positive
Yeah.
from that report.
I
not
mean,
just
another
a,
one is there was a girl that had a genetic condition. I can't remember the name of it, I'll be honest with you. But when it first came to me, I mean, I'd never heard of it before. So I did probably a day's research on it. And the conclusion was it didn't affect life expectancy at all. And so I was like, oh, well, it wasn't a waste, but I was like, oh, I've spent all that time on it. But she also had 5 other things wrong with her. So, but my report obviously talked about the genetic disorder, and then I showed the evidence to say, hang on a minute, there's no evidence to say that this. In fact, there's evidence to show that it doesn't affect life expectancy. So I think that may have brought some comfort to the family, knowing that, oh my God,
And then when you take into account that you're promoting the benefits that the care is providing as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
it just
for
promotes
families to
why
sit there
that
and go,
payment.
look at what a wonderful, my mum's life expectancy has increased by 10 years because of me, because of the care, the love, the attention that I'm putting in. This is worthwhile because actually she's had an extra 10 years because of what I've done. So I think it goes back to that, the cross between the social work and the analytic. I think cases like your 20-year-old, it just shows how beneficial it can be to the other stakeholders within that care.
Yeah, and I do hope that the deputies who instruct us share all our reports, because I think it is important.
There was another case study as well that you mentioned to me earlier. And
Greek.
Yes, your Greek.
Yes. So
Greek
going back,
man.
Greek man. Yes. Yeah. So going back to my anthropology days, I do take into account ethnicity, and I think it's important. For this gentleman, he was Greek national, but living in the UK. So of course he's receiving UK care. What I did on his instance is I not only looked at journals for UK citizens but also for Greek. So I researched Greek doctors and tried to find out on that. I also looked on WHO, World Organisation, on the average statistics for a Greek national and compared that to the UK national statistics. So I wanted to make sure that I took into account who he was. He was Greek. So why ignore that?
No, absolutely.
I mean, him, for example, a national average for a Greek person is, for him, it was 81. In the UK, it's 83. I mean, there, for example, you've got a difference, and it's all about that difference. There is based on, availability of care, lifestyle differences between the different nations.
Well, we talk about the Mediterranean diet, don't we? Eating olives and red peppers and things like that increase life expectancy. Yeah. You kind of know that's
But there's
true.
some places that don't have easily access to care and medicines and stuff. And I think that reflected on the lower average. So I wanted to take that into account because, of his heritage. And that was included in the report. But yeah, I did compare it. I compared UK and Greek because his nationality, but he lives in the UK.
And again, a computer system wouldn't be able to do that.
No, I don't think it would take into account because he's living in the UK. So there you go. He's a statistic for the UK now. But I don't. He's still got that lifestyle of a Greek gentleman. And so I think that it was important to take care of, and the hereditary of a Greek as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if somebody was to do a life expectancy on me, they'd have to understand that I was born in Germany and my diet consists of bratwurst and beer. So my life expectancy just drops instantly.
Yeah, I'll give you 5 years.
I know you touched on just then about anthropology, and we should have probably mentioned this at the beginning. You have got a master's in anthropology, you've got a bachelor's degree in forensic science. Anthropology, for those that don't know, is the investigation of the dead, isn't it?
Okay, wrong. Anthropology is the study of different cultures. No, different cultures.
Okay.
Forensic anthropology, yes, it's bones and skeletal remains.
Yeah.
And yes, I got a master's in forensic anthropology.
So how on earth have you jumped from being in Guatemala investigating mass graves to doing life expectancy reports on people that aren't dead. They're not there yet.
Yeah, interesting and a change. But yeah, so as forensic anthropologists, what they do is we created a biological profile. So we analyse human remains, and we create a biological profile to try and identify those remains. So the biological profile will include age, sex, ethnicity, and any medical conditions. Would take images of teeth, and so it's a whole biological profile, and it'd have an age range based on markers on the bones.
But then even that is based on research.
Oh, it's all based on literature. Yeah, so an
based,
anthropologist would look at
you're
signs of the body.
You're not an odontologist, so taking the images of the teeth, you're not going to be able to go, oh, that man was 3 years and 12 months. It's
the
based on somebody
anthropologist
else's
is more
research.
on the skeletal remains, so that examine all the bones. They'll look at the size of the pelvis and the shape of it to identify it's male or female. Then they'll look at the stature of a person by the length of the femur. And there's measurements, so we take a lot of measurements, and we look for evidence on bones, if there's arthritis or things like that, and then we refer to literature. So there's a lot of scientific literature there for stature for certain nationalities, and it will give you an age range or a size.
So instead of you going out and measuring bones, you've got social workers going out and doing care assessments and collecting
absolutely.
that data. It sounds silly, but that's all it is, isn't it? You were collecting data in a grave site.
Yeah, that was more physical collating. Yeah.
But the result is the same. You're coming back and you're analysing data.
Yeah.
Analysing the research.
Yeah,
and then
using
pulling
research
all of that
methods
together to identify life expectancy, or in that case, time of death.
Yeah, so it's almost like, while I'm creating my report, obviously the judge only sees my report, but to get to that point, I am literally creating a profile for that person to help me narrow it down.
I am going to. We're going to end it in a few moments, but there is one story that I want to put out there. When Kerry was at university, I studied at the same university as Kerry, up at University of Lincoln, and one New Year's Eve, she had me standing over the remains of a 200-year-old woman taking photos. Literally, as the chimes were ringing in for midnight, we were in this empty lab. Which was pitch black almost, and I was standing on the table, balanced precariously, taking photos so we could get home and she could carry on doing a research project. That's how exciting our university life was. Everyone else was out partying, and we're taking photos of 300-year-old skeletons. Absolutely one of my most favourite memories. It was a romantic New Year's Eve. I think we got McDonald's on the way home.
Of course.
Of course. New Year's Eve. Got to celebrate.
That's the only thing,
Thank you for joining us. I know you were a little bit nervous, but it's been genuinely interesting for me.
Less grilling than my last thesis.
And very much interesting, I hope, for everyone else. This is part of our Nellie on the Sofa series. It is culminating in NellieCon 2024, our social legal conference. Kerry is going to be speaking there on stage, live, for an hour. For 30 minutes, actually, I think it is. We've got some other fantastic speakers. We've got people coming from solicitors for the cost of court protection. We've got somebody coming to talk about your personal brand in marketing. We've got Mandy Davis, who was our first person on the sofa, if I remember rightly, talking about communications theory. We've got the Star Trust coming to talk, and Fumi will get really angry with me now because there's free parking and fabulous food. Oh my God, the food is amazing. So please have a look. You can find us dead easy, either on our nelliesupports.com website, or you can go on to Google and type in NellieCon. And it's one of the first ones that pops up. I'd love to have you there. We've got next month, we've got hopefully me on the sofa by myself, talking about mental capacity. No, we will have somebody on the sofa with us next month, but we are going to be talking about mental capacity next month. So please do look out for it and sign up for it. As always, if you've got any questions for Kerry, send them over to our email address, nellie@nelliesupports.com, and we will get those answered for you as quickly as possible. See you next month.